Luke chapter 14. No, Lord, I cannot follow thee. I pray thee, have me excused. The aims of the study is to understand who are those bidden, their list of excuses, how many calls are made and to whom, what happens to those who were bidden. So welcome and join us as we dig deep in the mine of truth during this study. Our prayer thought comes from Christ Object Lessons, page 127, paragraph 4. It states, "In every age there is a new development of truth, a message of God to the people of that generation. The old truths are all essential. The new truths is not independent of the old, but an unfolding of it. It is only as the old truths are understood that we can comprehend the new. When Christ desired to open to his disciples the truth of his resurrection, he began at Moses and all the prophets, and expounded unto them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. But it is the light which shines in the fresh unfolding of the truth that glorifies the old. He who rejects the new does not really possess the old. For him, it loses vital power and becomes a lifeless form." So Sister White is telling us that in every age there is a new development of truth. And old truths are essential because the new truth is really just an unfolding of the old. So those who do not possess or do not accept the new truth didn't really possess the old. They didn't really understand the old. When Christ wanted to speak about himself, he started at Moses and then at the prophets, explaining to him that even though he was fresh revealed truth, the Messiah at this time, he went back into the Bible, from Genesis, to show the people that he was already in the Bible from then. Our text for study comes from Luke chapter 14, and we're going to be reading from verses 16 to 24. "Then said he unto him, A certain man made a great supper, and bade many, and sent his servant at supper time to say to them that were bidden, Come, for all things are now ready. And they all with one consent began to make excuse. The first said unto him, I have bought a piece of ground, and I must needs go see it. I pray thee, have me excused. And another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to prove them. I pray thee, have me excused. And another said, I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. So the servant came and showed his lord these things. Then the master of the house, being angry, said to his servant, Go out quickly into the streets and the lanes of the city, and bring in hither the poor, and the maimed, and the halt, and the blind. And the servant said, Lord, it is done as thou hast commanded, and yet there is room. And the Lord said unto the servant, Go out into the highways and hedges, and compel them to come in, that my house may be filled. For I say unto you, that none of those men which were bidden shall taste of my supper. In the Bible we see a parable of a servant that was sent to a group of people that were already bidden. They were already invited to the banquet, but they started to make excuses. They had a piece of ground, they had a wife, they had new oxen, so they all started to make excuses for and reasons for not to come to the supper. So the Lord got angry and told his servant to go out into the streets and the lanes of the city and call in the poor, the maimed, the halt, and the blind. And then the servant did that, and he came back and he said, Lord, I have done as thou commanded me. So the Lord tells him, Go out into the highways and the hedges and compel them that my house may be filled. And then we see the very sad pronouncement of verse 24, that those who were originally bidden, invited, and the ones that gave excuses will not taste of the Lord's Supper. Come, for all things are now ready. Then said he unto him, A certain man made a great supper, and bade many, and sent his servant at supper time, to say to them that were bidden, Come, for all things are now ready. So the supper is now ready. In this parable it is made known that the closing hours of probationary time at supper time, about the end of the day, heaven is to send a message to them that are bidden, to them that already know the gospel of Christ, to the members of the church. The servant is to inform them that everything is now ready, that they should now come in for the great and long expected supper, a supper which they are to eat in the Master's mansion, the kingdom, not in their own. So here we see in Timely Greetings Volume 2 that heaven, at the closing hours of probationary time, at supper time, just at the close of probation, that a message is to be sent by the servant. And it's sent to those that are already in the gospel message. Those that are already in the church. And we know that there is only one true church, which is the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So, this message has gone out to the church, and they were to come and enjoy the supper. They all made excuses, and with one consent began to make excuse. The first said unto him, I have bought a piece of ground, and I must needs go see it. I pray thee have me excused. And another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I go to prove them. I pray thee have me excused. And another said, I have married a wife, and therefore cannot come. Those here mentioned did not excuse themselves from accepting the gospel of Christ, but they excused themselves from going into the master's mansion, from taking their seats at his table. Yes, according to the parable, those who had money to buy land, oxen and houses, also to marry at the time of the last call for the supper came, all excused themselves with one consent. But the poor and the afflicted, those who were in the streets and in the lanes, so to speak, who had nothing much of their own, and were in need of everything, were glad to go in for the supper. Those that were mentioned here, all excused themselves, not from the gospel of Christ, because they loved the gospel of Christ. They enjoyed the gospel, but they excused themselves from going into the master's mansion. They made excuses that they could not come. But the ones that did come in, the lame and the poor and the halt, they didn't have anything of themselves, and they were happy to go in. So we see that there's these two classes. Worldly interests were more important. Reading from the Testimonies, Volume 3, page 383, Sister White tells us, the parable correctly represents the condition of many professing to believe the present truth. The Lord has sent them an invitation to come to the supper which he has prepared for them at great cost to himself. But worldly interests look to them of greater importance than the heavenly treasure. They are invited to take part of things of eternal value, but their farms, their cattle, and their home interests seem of much greater importance than obedience to the heavenly invitation, that they overpower every divine attraction. And these earthly things are made the excuse of their disobedience to the heavenly command. Come, for all things are ready. These brethren are blindly following the example of those represented in the parable. They look at their worldly possessions and say, No, Lord, I cannot follow thee. I pray thee, have me excused. So here we see that worldly interests are the cause of the problem, that they are not heavenly minded. Yet they are in the church, but their desire for saving souls and for working for the Lord is put on the back burner, so to speak, and their houses and their families and their cattle and so forth are more important than the work that the Master has assigned them. The worldly attractions overpower every divine attraction, and earthly things are made the excuse of the disobedience to the heavenly command. Come, for all things are ready. So the attraction of worldly interests overpowers the divine attraction of heavenly treasure. Almost saved but entirely lost. Reading from Timely Greetings, Volume 2, number 11 and 12, it says, This is very natural. Those who are satisfied with what the world gives do not care to get out of it. Here you see why it is easier for a camel than it is for a rich person to get through the needle's eye. Those whose only difficulty is in trying to get richer, those who are deeply engrossed with this world's goods, cannot take time to eat of the Master's supper. Here fits the age-old saying, almost saved but entirely lost. Here is vividly seen that to accept one truth but to reject the next profits one nothing. The last call to the individual is what counts most. Those that are satisfied with what the world gives don't really care to get out of it. They want their houses and their goods and their cars and their whatever they want. They are deeply engrossed with the world's goods and cannot take time to eat of the Master's supper. How sad this saying that says almost saved but entirely lost. What really counts is that when God sends a message, you accept it and you hear it and you weigh the evidence of the message to see if it is a message that God sends. Because if you only accept up to the second last message, how can you be saved? Almost saved but entirely lost. What a fearful proclamation. Also reading from Timely Greetings, Volume 2, it says, "At the times when new truths have been introduced, millions have lost out only because they were too well satisfied with what they had. They saw need of nothing better, or else they were too proud to accept unpopular truth from one of God's own appointed messengers. Thus it is that when God sends a message, rather than it being to them a step upward toward salvation, it has been and still is to many a step downward toward damnation. To this end was the prophet instructed, Go and tell this people, Hear ye indeed, but understand not, and see ye indeed, but perceive not. Make the heart of the people fat, and make their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart and convert and be healed." Coming from Isaiah chapter 6 verses 9 and 10. So here we read that millions who have been introduced to new truths have lost out. Why? Because they were satisfied with what they had. They saw that they needed nothing better, or else they were too proud to accept a message from a meek and lowly appointed messenger from God. We see that when God sends a message, rather than it being a step upward towards salvation, we see that people reject it and is a step downward to damnation. Oh, brothers and sisters, can we see that this, to accept the message is a salvation issue, because it's the Holy Spirit that is talking to you in the message. We see that Isaiah is instructed to go and tell the people because they don't understand and they don't hear and they do not perceive what he is saying. He goes to tell them, you hear indeed, but you don't understand. You see indeed, but you don't really understand. Two periods of time. In this parable are seen two periods of time. The first period is while the gospel has bade many to the marriage supper, the time of the apostles to the time of the last servant with the last message God sends to his people. The time all things are ready. So we see that there are two periods. The first period is while the gospel has bade many to the marriage supper, which is from the time of the apostles to the time of his last servant with the last message. From the time from the apostles up until the time when the last servant with his message goes out. The next period, or period number 2, is the time in which his last servant served. The servant is sent, as we are told, at supper time, at the end of the day, indicating that he bears the last message. Moreover, he is at first sent to those who have been previously bidden, that is, to those who were already in the gospel truth in the church. Which church? The Seventh-day Adventist church, the one true church of God at this very time, is where the message has been sent to those that were bidden. So we see that the servant has a message which he bears at the end at supper time, and that he went first to those that were bidden, but then they made excuses. At the outset, he is to contact a class of people deeply engrossed with the cares of this life, and is to tell them that all things are now ready, that if they wish they can now prepare and go to the wedding, there to enjoy the bridegroom's banquet. This is the last call for the supper. So when the servant is sent out, we see that at the beginning he is to contact a class of people deeply engrossed with the cares of this life. Those that want to marry, those who have made excuses about their lands, their families, and their cattle. Is it wrong to marry, to have cattle, and to have houses? No, absolutely not. But when these things take precedence over God's commandments and his word that he's instructed his people, this is where the problem lies. Not in those things themselves, but that these things become more important to the person than God. The first call comes in the church. But what happens? They excuse themselves from having anything to do with the banquet just then. Some lay the blame on their professions, while others blame having to make a living for the family. Whereupon the master of the house angrily sends his servant to the poor and to the afflicted, to those who are hungry and not too busy to take heed, to those who are not so encumbered with business and home that they cannot answer his call. This very thing takes place in the city proper, the church. The poor, those who realize that they are not rich and increased with goods, come in, but still there is room for more. So we see that the call first goes out into the church, the city. There are those that come into the church who understand that they are not rich and increased with goods. So we see that this call first comes in the church. But what happens in the church? They excuse themselves from having anything to do with the banquet. And they blame their professions and their families that they are too busy. And the master of the house, who gets angry, sends his servant to the poor and the afflicted, those who are hungry and not too busy to take heed. They are the ones that feel that they are not rich and increased with goods, and they come in. But yet there is room for more. Yet there is room. And the servant said, Lord, it is done as thou hast commanded, and yet there is room. And the Lord said unto the servant, Go out into the highways and the hedges, and compel them to come in, that the house may be filled. The fact that in the city those who had already been bidden, where the last call for supper came to them, proves that the city represents the church. To them was the servant first sent. The highways and the hedges, therefore, where the servant next went, represent the world, far and wide aside from the church. So again, we prove that this message that goes to the bidden and those that are in the halt and the blind and the maimed, which are in the city, are first in the church. Then the message goes out to the highways and the hedges. Then outside the church. Then it is that the Lord of the servant commanded that he should go after those who are on the highways and the hedges, those outside the church circles, even to the ends of the earth, the hedges. But before the servant goes to the highways and the hedges on his last mission, the master emphatically informs him that those who had been bidden and who excused themselves from coming in are to be entirely excluded from the banquet, and none of them will be permitted to even taste of his supper. That by turning a deaf ear to the call, these have closed their own probationary time, and that there is now nothing that can alter the situation. After the servant's compelling cry goes out to the nations and the master's house is filled, the wedding takes place, and the bridegroom serves all that are in the house, but none others. So here we see the most important and sad part, which is told in the verse that follows, verses 24. For I say unto you that none of these men which were bidden shall taste of my supper. This is what happened. As soon as they excused themselves, probation closed for them. They had no other chance of tasting his supper. Probation nevertheless remained open for those who had not yet been bidden. Those who were in the highways and hedges could yet be saved. The church seems too well versed as the time probation closes for the world, but not at all informed that probation for her members closes at the very time they reject a heaven-sent message. Here is shown why the 5 foolish virgins found the door closed, though they had later obtained the oil and gotten to the door. Their probation had closed when they failed at first opportunity to fill their vessels with extra oil and extra message. Here we see that probation closes for them, for those that excuse themselves from going to the supper. Probation is, however, still open for those that are yet in the highways and the hedges. The church, as we know today, seems very well versed with the closing of the probation for the world. They tell it all the time, but they have no idea about the probation for the church that comes first. They will say that there is no 2 probations. There's only one global probation or close of probation for the end of the world. But here we are learning that there are 2 probations, one for the church, one for the world. And that those who reject the message, the very time they reject the heaven-sent message, their probation closes. How sad. What a sad pronouncement here. Let us not be like the foolish virgins. Let us take oil in our vessels so that we may get to the bridegroom. No more sinners in Zion. The same event is again given from another point of view, this time by the gospel prophet Isaiah. Awake, awake, put on thy strength, O Zion, put on thy beautiful garments, O Jerusalem, the holy city. For henceforth there shall no more come into thee the uncircumcised and the unclean. Shake thyself from the dust. Arise and sit down, O Jerusalem. Loose thyself from the bands of thy neck, O captive daughter of Zion. This particular prophecy discloses that while the church, Jerusalem and Zion, is asleep and naked with the unclean in her midst, and in captivity among the Gentiles away from her own land, an awakening cry, a message, comes urging her to arise and to put on her beautiful garments. For the wicked, declares the cry, will no more come into her, for they are to be utterly cut off. So we see that an awakening cry, a message, is to awaken the church to put on her beautiful garments, because the cry declares that from henceforth no more will come into her that are uncircumcised and unclean. That is still yet to take place. The church's program and main theme for the year is I Will Go. And this is a campaign that tells every Seventh-day Adventist to go out and preach the gospel to the world. But as we see from the judgment of the living, that the call is not yet come to the world. The call is first to go into the church, to bring in the poor and the blind and the maimed. And we see that the General Conference has this total member involvement, which is about sending you to go and bring in those from outside. But the call for that has not yet come. The church is still impure. And only once the church is purified will it then be given the call to go out into the world, and then the church will be sent to preach the three angels' message, the everlasting gospel. Our study summary is there was a first call to those already in the church, but worldly interests look to them of greater importance than the heavenly treasure. This very thing takes place in the city proper, the church. The poor, those who realize that they are not rich and increased with goods, come in, but still there is room for more. Then it is that the Lord of the servant commands that he should go after those who are on the highways and hedges, those outside the church circles, even to the ends of the earth. The master emphatically informs that those who had been bidden and who excused themselves from coming in are to be entirely excluded from the banquet, and none of them will be permitted even to taste of his supper. How sad when Seventh-day Adventists realized that they were already invited and bidden to the supper, but they were too busy for the cares of this life, with the families and the cars and the houses and all those things. They were too busy for God and his work. How sad it will be when they realize that those that came in and heard the extra truth and the extra message accepted that extra message because they knew that they were not rich and increased with goods, but that they were poor, blind, and naked. Those are the ones that accept the truth. And then the message of salvation goes out to the world and brings those into the marriage supper, those that are outside of the church, in the highways and the hedges. That is still yet to happen. And the Master tells us that those that were bidden, Seventh-day Adventists who had all the truth and the light revealed to them but were too busy with the cares of this life, will not be at the supper. And that probation will have closed for those who made excuses. This comes to the end of our study, and we pray that you have been blessed, and I pray that you will awake and see your duty to God at this time, and don't be asleep in the cares of this life. Thank you for being with us. Amen.